Hi, everybody. This is Erin Diamond, and we appreciate you all tuning in again. Today, we have a very special guest. Her name is Lacey Dunn. Many of you may already know of her on Instagram as Faith and Fit. She is a fitness fanatic, a crazy cat lady. She is a very soon to be registered dietitian, and she is going after her master's. So I will let you go, Lacey, and give a little more information about yourself rather than just that quick little Wikipedia version.
No, I love it. That was perfect. Get it perfect with a P-U-R-R. Hey guys, my name is Lacey Dunn. I am Faith and Fit on Instagram. I am a future registered dietitian, currently doing my dietetic internship at Texas Women's University in Houston, Texas. I have about 6 weeks left, so I'm pushing through. But I am a NPC bikini competitor and online coach, and I 100% believe that food is medicine and that we need to live a balanced lifestyle and making sure that every single diet is what works best for the individual. So I just want to thank you, Erin, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I am not used to being the guest, so this is quite different for me, but I'm super stoked and I'm beyond pumped about this topic and anything you want to dive into because my brain goes 5 million ways.
And Jordan really enjoys your post and loves going back and forth with you. So you were one of our first picks to get on and talk about a lot of things that we're interested in. You just have so much knowledge and information to share, and you're such a good voice in the fitness community in this industry.
Yeah, especially you have such a good scientific foundation, and obviously your credentials speak for themselves. But you communicate in a really great way, which I think is lacking a lot in the scientific community. There's a lot of good researchers, a lot of good people that understand the clinical side of things, but you're able to do both. That's why whenever I see your posts or anything you put out, I'm always like, hell yeah, that totally makes sense, and I like the way that you communicate it. So yeah, we're excited.
Cool.
No, thank you. That is the best news I can ever hear because I always think, I'm like, could I have said that better? Could I have made it like more relatable to the audience? Because that's the trouble with science is it can be so confusing.
For sure.
And nobody ever is able to understand a scientific paper if they haven't been through like statistics courses. So it's really hard for the normal person to be able to assimilate that information. So thank you so much. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, no, he's right. You do a really good job of that. And we'll get into some of that scientific stuff. But before we do that, I want you to just talk about yourself a little bit. How did you find your love for nutrition, and really how did you get into what you're doing now?
Okay, sure. So my undergrad, I did that at University of Central Florida, where I essentially started weight training in order to make the Division I cheerleading team. So I was super skinny. I didn't know what I was doing. So utilizing bodybuilding.com as well as my own research, I figured out what to do for weight training. And then I fell in love with weight training. And nutrition wasn't like perfect. So once I made the cheerleading team, that's when I started learning even more about training, and I dove even more into nutrition. I utilize, I don't know if you guys have heard of Lyle McDonald, but I utilize his articles. He is fabulous. So utilizing all the research, and that's when after Instagram, scrolling through Instagram, I saw bikini competitions. So I was a cheerleader, and then I wanted to compete in bikini competitions because it looked fun. So I went to see a show. I went to go see Michelle Schroeder, who I'm still good friends with. But when I saw her, I was just blown away by how fun it looked. So I came from a competitive cheerleading background. So the glitz, the glamour, the fun, the stage presence, everything. I missed that. I missed competing. I missed my outlet to shine. And so bikini competitions, to me, it reminded me of competitive cheerleading.
Yeah.
So I decided, you know what? I'm going to prep for a show. I'm going to do this. And funny thing is, I actually asked my cheerleading coach, and she told me no, that I wasn't allowed to do it, and I wasn't allowed to gain weight. And that basically is what made me decide, you know what? I'm going to do it. So
right.
I did.
That's usually how it works.
I know. So I started, I guess, prepping. I hired a coach. My prep was really basically me getting a lot of muscle. Then I did my first show in April 2014. wow, 2014. I feel old now. But that was the Orlando Europa. And from there, it was just like I fell in love. So I did my first show, and then I remained sharing my story on Instagram. And then I got on, I was not invited, I was chosen as a spokesmodel for bodybuilding.com through the voting process, as well as going to LA. And so that was kind of the, I guess, explosion for me, in which I was able to start putting out more content for a lot of other people and be seen. And so that was really the game changer for me, for realizing this is where I want to be, is teaching people all about nutrition, getting them where they want to be, and helping them realize that they can reach their goals being and living life, like being healthy and balanced and not restricting foods, not going to extremes, just really doing what they love. They can reach their goals. So that's a little of the spiel. I'm not really used to like talking about myself like that.
No, I know exactly what you mean. We've recorded our own stories, and Jordan did his just last night, and he was like, all right, I'm glad that's over. I hate talking about myself. But it's good to give everybody a little bit of background.
Yeah, it's funny that your early inspiration was Lyle McDonald. He was the first book that I wrote, or that I read, nutrition related, was the protein book. I think that I was a freshman in college, and that's really when it kind of turned my mind around the thought of, oh, so you mean every person with muscles who tells me something isn't true? Like, people telling me that you need 1.5 grams of protein per body or per body weight. And then I read his book, and I'm like, a lot of this isn't what I thought I knew. And that's really what kind of opened the door for me, for my curiosity. So Lyle's he's a great resource.
Yeah, and his new book came out, the women's volume book.
Yeah.
And it is insane. And I really, really, really want to like read through it, but it's like 400 pages, and there's no way I'm going to be able to get through that right now.
Yeah, I'm having the same dilemma. I told myself 10 pages a week, and I mean, it's dense. I haven't really even made a dent.
It's almost like, his books are almost like encyclopedias. They're so well like a table of contents that you can just refer to a general subject that you need to elaborate on. And yeah, that is a good one. I haven't started it yet either.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's what I should do. Just crack into pieces that I want to learn about. Well, cool. Yeah. Okay, so we'll go from there. Oh, and just a fun fact that I thought about just now. So I think I've followed you on Instagram since...
We've followed each other
since forever. I know. I think... Wasn't you... Your Instagram was different. The handle, it was like... Wasn't it Fit and Faith at one point?
It was, yeah.
I've followed you for that long. So I knew most of that story.
2014 status.
Yeah, I've known most of that story. Cool. So we'll get into this more scientific-based stuff and things that I really want to educate our audience on. And one of my favorite podcasts of yours, and you guys, Lacey has a great podcast herself. It's called Uplift Fit Nutrition. We'll place it in the show notes so you guys can check it out. One of my favorite podcasts of yours was one that you talked about birth control, PCOS, hormonal adaptations, and I loved the PCOS part because I know working with women, it's wildly overdiagnosed and misinterpreted, and I kind of just want to get you on that topic a little bit. If we could talk about what PCOS is, what it isn't, kind of just what I just said about how it's overdiagnosed, and then what you've kind of done with your clients or what you've seen, how ways to help this, and just basically how a one-size-fits-all approach isn't the answer here.
Yeah.
So that's a lot.
So much. I love this topic. I'm obsessed with hormones, with the thyroid, with gut health. I love it all because I am a woman, and it's also a problem that I have seen, and I love fixing problems. So PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome. And what a lot of people are thinking PCOS is the presence of polycystic ovaries. So what a lot of women don't know is actually our ovaries naturally have cysts. So each month we have little cysts, and that's because when the follicle grows, that follicle can grow little cysts, and then it ruptures, and that is when the little egg will, travel through all the way to your uterus. So what in PCOS's diagnosis, what a lot of the doctors are doing is there's like a Rome criteria. So in this criteria, you have either elevated testosterone, you have the presence of polycystic ovaries, or you don't have a menstrual cycle. So out of these three criteria, you only have to have two of the criteria for a doctor to diagnose you with PCOS.
Right.
Now, this poses a problem because, number one, if you don't have a period, that means that something's going on. That doesn't necessarily mean that is attributed to a polycystic ovary. Number two, we naturally have cysts in our ovaries. Now, of course, we don't want them huge, but they're basically, if you go any woman and you take an ultrasound, there's going to be a cyst there. So, and number three, elevated testosterone. So that problem is not all ladies, PCOS is not always because you have elevated testosterone. There are multiple causes of PCOS. So that is the problem these days with PCOS's diagnosis is a doctor will just say, hey, you have two of the three criteria, you have PCOS. So it's a huge issue in my opinion, because then people take that diagnosis and not only do they make their diagnosis their life, but then they think they're stuck and they're like, you know what, I have to go do these protocols, all these PCOS protocols. And you know what? They may not have PCOS. They may have low progesterone, elevated estrogen. They might just have amenorrhea. They may have a thyroid disorder. They may have a gut disorder. So it's really essential that doctors dive into the problem and go deeper and not just diagnose. And you know what? And a whole nother problem is it's just like IBS. So IBS is the same issue, irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah, and I remember explaining that exact thing one time to a girl who just DM'd me and, have you met all this criteria? And she said, you just explained way more to me than my doctor ever has. And that just goes to show and teach people to ask more questions. You have to be your own advocate when it comes to your health. And that specifically, I'm just fascinated by because I see it so often with PCOS. And you, like you said, could be trying to fix something that's not even an issue.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is similar, but men often we get lab work done and hormones come back irregular, especially hormones that fluctuate wildly throughout the day. And then somebody will read one hormone panel and automatically identify a disorder. Whereas rather than taking averages and looking at different times of the day, how are you sleeping? Little nuances there that are often overlooked. Is it pretty similar with PCOS?
Yeah, and the struggle too in regards to checking hormones is that if you are going to have your hormones checked, you have to know exactly where you are in your cycle. Otherwise, those hormones are meaningless. And that is a struggle because a lot of the women who have PCOS don't have cycles. They're
Right.
going in, getting their hormones checked. They don't know where they are. And then something could be up or down. Well, guess what? Your progesterone is low in the beginning of your cycle. Then it elevates. So if you go in the beginning of your cycle and it's low, they'll be like, oh, you have lower progesterone. Or then you go later in your cycle and your estrogen is low. And they're like, oh, your estrogen is low. Like you have to know where you are in your cycle in order for that to even make sense. Is it, it's not the same for Test. Test doesn't move at all for men, right? Based on yeah.
It actually does quite a bit from not a huge variation, but say a normal testosterone range is 300 to 1100 deciliter to nanoliter. In the mornings, it's usually the highest for men because when they wake up in that second sleep cycle. So that's why they usually try to have you have your testosterone tested in the morning, whereas later in the day it'll start to decrease. But still, if you're within range, I don't think it's enough to cause an issue. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Nothing like women and based on the monthly cycle, but throughout the day.
Yeah, throughout the day, rather. Yeah, not some sort of a monthly cycle for sure. But throughout the day, it does vary some.
Okay, then that'll be kind of a cortisol connection, I bet.
Probably. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, and then just back to the point of female hormones, and then if you're on birth control, all of that's irrelevant. So.
Oh my gosh. So PCOS can even be caused by post-birth control syndrome.
Right.
So to describe post-birth control syndrome, so birth control essentially is your body given synthetic hormones. And when your body is given these synthetic hormones, then your body can shut down your own body's natural ability to produce these hormones. So what a lot of women have a problem with is they go off birth control and then they don't know what's going on. They're gaining weight. They're losing their cycle. They're losing hair. Like there's multiple things that can happen. They have bad gut health. So this is called post-birth control syndrome. And nowadays, PCOS is tend to diagnosed because of post-birth control syndrome as well. The problem with birth control is not only does it affect your hormones, it can affect your thyroid, and the worst of all, it can affect your gut. And your gut is your wealth. Like if you do not have a healthy gut, that can contribute to intestinal permeability. Then you have all these things that can happen with little toxins. I like, they're not toxins, but I like to call them toxins, getting into your whole entire body, getting into your bloodstream, and that causes chronic inflammation, that can cause food insensitivities, that can cause changes to your thyroid, your HPA axis, and your hormones, so a multitude of issues. I hate birth control. I know that for some people, it's what they need.
Right.
But it really does lead to multiple issues.
Yeah, for sure. It's just been this year that I've personally gone down this rabbit hole, gotten off birth control about 8 months ago, and everything that we're talking about right now, I've spent hours looking into it, and it's just insane that more people don't talk about it. There's not more awareness around it. It is so terrible for you.
That was one of the early conversations that Erin and I had when we met. She was on birth control at the time, and we had a deep conversation about that because I am nowhere near as knowledgeable about the detriment as you are, but I still know it's a horrible hormone just blasting remedy for a problem that has other solutions. And so, yeah, we, as I'm like, yeah, get off it. Like, I think it's horrible. Have you ever heard about the study that was done? And I can't remember, I have no references here, and I hate to even repeat something, but I'll be kind of paraphrasing. So they studied, the hypothesis was that females to men are attracted to each other based on certain scents, based on histamine levels. So histamine levels being an indicator of your immune health. So I guess there are 4 different levels of histamine. So 1 through 4 can indicate you're maybe strong in one, and then maybe your partner is weak in one. So then you're going to be attracted to each other because then you're then going to reproduce a strong baby. Does that make sense? Yeah. So they were trying to test this hypothesis, and what they did was they took women, a control group, and they had them, and then they took another group of men, and they had the men work out in these T-shirts for a few weeks, a period of a few weeks, not washing the T-shirts. T-shirts obviously smell horrible. Put them in plastic. And so they had these women smell these T-shirts and then rate the attractiveness based on like a 1 to 4 scale. Some women, surprisingly, I guess, like the way guys smell when they work out. I don't know. And get on a weird topic, but I guess there's some science behind it because what they found, there was a direct, like 79%, there was a direct correlation to the person. They also tested the subject's histamine levels, and they found that those were weak and say 2 thought that the number 2 strong was attractive, right? And it was a direct correlation, but then there was a random, certain percent that they couldn't figure out. Well, then they found out that random percent were all on birth control. So it was throwing off their ability to recognize the reproductive scent, right? Or whatever this connection is. Really interesting.
So basically, conclusion is if you're on birth control, you don't know how to select a mate.
Yeah.
That is super interesting. Gosh, that's a terrible study. I would never want to be involved in that.
Could you imagine? I know.
Hopefully they got paid well. But,
oh yeah, nowadays they're always somehow compensated.
Right.
I had never heard of that.
I'll find it. I've actually saved it and I've emailed it to people. I'll send it to you today.
Yeah. I had heard about it too before he told me randomly. And then after we started dating, we had that talk about, how terrible birth control is and getting off of it. I was like, well, what if I'm not attracted to you anymore? Well, what if I'm so skewed?
Yeah, I think it definitely, in regards to attraction and libido, it all depends per person.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, it's very individual. Well, we'll just kind of, unless you have anything else on this topic you want to touch on, we'll pivot here, and I'm going to let Jordan dive into another one that we wanted to touch on today.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention a little bit about PCOS and how to fight the battle. And these are my little notes that I have. I have this information in my brain, but I never want to say it and then it be wrong because sometimes it goes 5 billion ways. So essentially there are types of PCOS. So there's insulin resistance, there's post-pill, like we said, post-pill, there's androgen excess, and then there's a I don't know what it is, PCOS. So with insulin resistance PCOS, the most important thing is, of course, getting that insulin resistance, checked. So making sure that if you're overweight, losing weight, making sure you have insulin sensitizers such as chromium, berberine, cinnamon, metformin. These are very common. Metformin is a really common drug these days that pre-diabetics and diabetics get. It's essentially really safe. I'm not saying go the drug route. I'm just saying that these things may really help. A carb controlled and general healthy diet. And then as well with the insulin resistance, what can really help is making sure that you have carbohydrates pre and post workout, because that's when you're most insulin sensitive. So, I'm choking on my own spit. Sorry, guys. So making sure that you utilize when you're most insulin sensitive. And then if you start your day with a higher fat and higher protein and lower carbohydrate meal, this can help as well. For the post-pill PCOS, the biggest thing is time, making sure you're not under or overeating, maintaining a healthy body weight. And then there's certain supplements that can help, such as peony and licorice, and then Vitex as well. But the biggest thing with Vitex is if you have elevated prolactin or LH levels, then you don't want to take Vitex. With the androgen excess, this is when it comes tricky, because sometimes some people have to really take aromatase inhibitors, and they have to go the route of medications. But you can supplement with DIM, the peony/licorice, and then anti-androgen compounds. The last thing I want to mention is just for overall hormone health, make sure, women, that you get B6, zinc, magnesium, iron, and iodide. I'm not saying supplement with all these things, but make sure that you have your daily recommended values for there. So your RDA.
Yeah. I'm so glad you went into that. And I guess that's a lot of information for people. So if there's one place to start and I can help, get your blood work done.
100%.
I think a lot of people,
whatever right. I just said, don't take an approach and run with it. You have to be working with somebody if you have a hormone condition, PCOS, hypothalamic amenorrhea. You have to make sure you're working with a qualified health professional.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, they get overwhelmed. They don't know where to start. They search the internet. They see all these things you're thinking. They try to self-diagnose, or they are diagnosed by, two of these criteria from a doctor, and they're like, all right, work with somebody, continue, get blood work done and get it done often, because like we talked about, the levels are going to change, and then come up with a route of treatment from there.
Another thing I do want to mention is if you don't have a cycle, now this isn't always going to work, because LH levels, they decide whether or not this will work or not. So if you do not have normal LH levels, this isn't going to work for you. But if you don't know where you are in your cycle and you still want to get blood work done, you can track your daily temperature, because when the follicle ruptures, I like to say, it explodes, and it triggers the difference between the luteal phase and the follicular phase. You have a spike in your daily temperature. So if you take your temperature every single day for around 30 days, because women's cycles vary from 28 to 34 days, then that spike in temperature will let you know when you ovulate. And that triggers, the second phase of your menstrual cycle. And then that will let you know where you are in your menstrual cycle based on the elevation in body temperature.
Okay. So I didn't know that. So taking it daily.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay. So you're looking for that.
Move too much. It'll move like a 0.3-ish for body temperature, but you'll track every single day. The Daisy app is fantastic, and it's a natural fertility awareness kind of method.
Right.
And that is what I have ladies track if they don't know where they are in their cycle.
Okay.
Interesting. Where at in the menstrual cycle is the most optimal time to get lab work done?
It doesn't matter as long as you know where you are.
Okay. Yeah, so then you can compare the data.
Yeah,
with
because they have ranges for all of them.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and making sure if you are going to go get blood work done, like progressively, that you go every single time the same exact time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Well, yeah, I love this topic, and I think I'm gonna have so many listeners who do as well.
I love it too. I want to get like my second master's in endocrinology. I'm obsessed.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much new research coming out, especially from the gut connection to hormonal balance. That's really fascinating as well. You know?
Yeah, I made an Instagram post just scratching the surface today, and I'm like, I could literally sit here for 12 hours and just keep diving in on reading and researching.
No, you should. You should do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it goes over your head. I mean, a lot of things go over my head, but I love it. I love how the body is just a crazy system, and all these factors we can't control can play such an important part of our health.
Yeah, it's really wild.
Yeah, we're in a fun time too, where technology and especially medical knowledge is expanding so rapidly that it's going to be interesting to, when we're all 20 years from now, to look back to realize how little we knew.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the whole entire expansion of epigenetics is just mind blowing.
Yeah.
I'm so excited because right now, like, you can get blood work done and you can get saliva tests. You can get like 23andMe done. I actually did that, so if anybody wants to do that, I highly suggest it.
I was just listening to 23andMe with Chris Masterjohn was talking about it today on something I was listening.
Oh my God, I love him.
That was he was on Ben Greenfield this week, which was a great episode.
Okay.
Yeah, you would love it too, because he's talking a lot about why sugar isn't necessarily as bad as what everybody makes it out to be. So that would be one you would enjoy.
Oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
People demonize sugar, but yeah, the expansion of how your DNA reacts to certain foods, how it reacts to a certain macronutrient ratio, and
so
just
23andMe, is that what you would recommend primarily for epigenetic genetic testing? It's 23andMe.
100%, yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's some. If for all of our listeners, that's somebody or a resource that if you do want to look into, it's something I'm looking forward to doing. And yeah, you basically they test your genetic code, basically your DNA, and lets you know. Can you kind of explain a little bit behind that?
Yeah, so what you do is you spit into this little tube, and then you send it off, and then they can do an ancestral test, or they can do just DNA, or they can do both. And essentially it looks at specific genes and specific alleles that you may have that may be a marker for a certain disease state, or based on what they know so far, like based on how you process certain nutrients. So, for example, I was able to check and see that I don't have the late onset Alzheimer's gene. I don't have the genes that are known for being diagnosed with breast cancer. Which I knew this already, but I have the gene for being a fast metabolizer of caffeine, because I know that because I can run through some caffeine. And then apparently there's a gene that they found that you're not a endurance or power strength athlete, and apparently I don't have that gene. I'm like, no figure. Like, thanks, mom, dad. Like, I don't have this awesome gene.
Yeah, I've heard that too. No, that's really interesting. Definitely.
Yeah, that is funny. It makes me want to do it now.
No, you definitely should. And the best thing about the 23andMe, not to detour our conversation, but every single time they come up with a new gene or a new allele, they'll reprocess your DNA, and they'll tell you, hey, this is what happens for you. It's pretty awesome. I love it.
That is cool.
Yeah.
We're going to have to get on that. I definitely want to try that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that way you can be cognizant of any genes that you're exposed to that might be prone to certain disorders or diseases, and then you can kind of get ahead of it.
Yeah.
That's a great tool. Yeah, it's so exciting to see where this is developing and the resources that we have just as people to optimize our health. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that people can do is making sure that they don't have nutrient deficiencies in life. So getting the blood work done every 6 months, and then doing the 23andMe, because I seriously believe in that, because there's so many disease states that can be influenced by our food, such as NTHFR. So that one is influenced with detoxification, hemochromatitis, hemochromatosis, so iron levels. And then there's a gene, I don't specifically remember the name of it, but you are at risk for having high B12 levels. So this is something I actually had. So taking a B12 supplement, you just basically hurt yourself and you get too much B12 in your body. So I think it's really important. And I really like the fact that these things are expanding.
Yeah, that is interesting. Well, hey, I think we'll shift gears unless you had anything else you wanted to add on genetic testing or anything along those lines.
We're good.
Um, Something that we find really interesting and that we hear all the time, and there's so many different levels of propaganda when it comes to nutrition and the media and things that you hear, and everybody's confused by certain way things are packaged. So let's talk about GMOs a little bit. You and Dylan Bear, shout out Dylan Bear, good friend of ours, did a podcast that I thought was really, really awesome, well communicated, and well thought out in the sense that you weren't claiming, hey, GMOs are 100% safe. We don't have any evidence that says that they're not. And can you kind of just elaborate on that a little bit? I know it's probably a deep rabbit hole that we could get into, but should people fear GMO foods from the evidence that we have today?
Okay. So GMOs are, which a lot of people know, genetically modified organisms. And as of right now, they are allowed in produce and meats, and they are allowed to be used, and they are approved by the FDA. The problem with the propaganda, like you're mentioning, is that people are saying they're either extremely bad for you and they're going to kill you and they're causing all disease, or they're saying, oh, they're completely safe and these are all tested by the FDA and that's why they're approved. So the FDA doesn't necessarily, I mean, they do studies and they prove the safety, but the problem is we don't know the long-term safety of these foods. So my fear is I don't like to say necessarily these foods are exactly safe for us. They're proven by the FDA, they're proven by studies to not have delirious effects on us. But the thing is, they're new. We really do not know the long-term effects. So I like to say, don't demonize anything. Life is short. If you want GMO corn, it's not going to kill you. There are literally 5 billion studies, and I can assure you, you will not find one saying GMO corn killed somebody. So I don't like people generalizing and demonizing food. Food Revolution, Food Evolution is a fantastic documentary. And I hate documentaries, but I loved this one because it really goes on both sides of the topic.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts on GMOs? I'm curious.
No, I'm sort of a middle ground, and I can understand where the fear comes from. I can understand why there's leverage from a marketing standpoint to say GMO free. So I can see why you always got to look from an incentive base. If somebody's making a claim, why are they making that claim? If it's a food product that's specifically promoting GMOs as harmful, well, it's probably because they're selling a product that is GMO free. From what I've seen, like you said, we are kind of the first subjects long-term wise in this long evolving study to see maybe what the effects are. But my ultimate position is we simply wouldn't be here otherwise. So when you look at it from that standpoint, it's hard to be anti-GMO.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and what a lot of people don't understand is GMOs have saved lives, and they have made lives. Like GMOs, think of IVF and people having babies that otherwise would not be able to have babies. Think about insulin and type 2 diabetes and type 1 diabetes. Like a GMO, insulin is a GMO.
Yeah.
So think about your vaccines. Like these are all genetically modified. And just because something is genetically modified doesn't mean that it's bad for you. Even some genetically modified foods may be even better for you because they have been genetically modified. If you just think about like natural colors or natural flavors. Some natural flavors can have delirious effects on your health. Whereas some that are tightly controlled in a laboratory, you know exactly what's in them. There's nothing added to it. So it's safer than a natural product that you literally had zero control of how the DNA happened or how things crossed over or cross-linked or grew into what it was today. So I'm not a fan of people, demonizing everything.
Yeah, I think so many people say natural without even knowing what they mean by natural.
No meaning whatsoever, unless it's a meat or poultry product.
Yeah.
Oh, fun fact, actually. There's legislation being done where they're actually, and it's in Congress right now, so it's going to be a bill to where they want to regulate the terms natural and healthy.
Interesting.
Huh.
Yeah.
I think the healthy term may confuse people more than it would be good because it would be based on fat intake, sodium intake, and then total like whole grain content.
Really?
Yeah, so they're saying that in order to be healthy, in quotes, healthy, that it would need to be half whole grain. And I'm a firm believer in whole grains, but I also think that it can potentially, like if a product isn't even a grain product and they kind
That's
of
what I was just gonna
into
ask.
the
Yeah.
criteria, yeah.
Huh. I got excited for a minute and then I remembered that it's the government doing this. So
Oh yeah, so you
yeah,
never know.
it's
Like
not gonna make
sunlight
any
from
sense.
it, or yeah, like the whole entire laws for caloric values being on labels for restaurants that was supposed to be out like 4 years ago and still has not passed. Things are they take forever.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. You want to jump to the next topic here?
Yeah, cool. So unless you have anything else, we have one more thing we were going to talk about today. And I'm going to let Jordan speak on it a little bit.
Yeah, this is something that I'm extremely interested in. It's something that I listen and read a lot about. Something that I know you're passionate about, and that's the carbohydrate insulin model and why this is such a popular. We talk about demonizing certain foods or demonizing certain areas of health and nutrition, and generalizing, for example, generalizing obesity and being carbohydrate insulin model to be the blame. Why do you think that this has so much traction in today's society? And maybe you can explain a little bit of the background and your position on this.
Yeah, and I want you to do so as well, because I remember you made a fantastic post about it. So essentially what people are saying is that carbohydrates spike insulin, and insulin causes you to store fat, and that is why America is fat.
Right.
So the problem is that now people are taking that and they're running with it, and they're going the whole keto approach and saying going keto stops you from having carbohydrates, which stops you from spiking your insulin, which then lowers the body fat that you store and is going to help everybody with their weight loss. Essentially, yes, you will lower your insulin, but people aren't fat just because they have insulin. Like, insulin is essential for you to be able to live, breathe, and thrive. If you do not have insulin, you are a type 1 diabetic and you will die without being injected with insulin. Insulin is essential, and we shouldn't demonize insulin because it's all about your total caloric intake based on how you're going to gain weight, making sure that you have healthy hormone and thyroid levels, and making sure you don't have chronic inflammation. That's when insulin really takes a demonizing kind of role. So insulin's job is to essentially store nutrients. And yes, it is to also, store body fat. But also insulin is essential for us to be able to metabolize our food that we eat. So I don't know where to go from here. I'm kind of like, insulin's very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And something that's one point to that, and this is just a side note, that insulin, that, people think that it's such a simple cause and effect relationship that, okay, if I don't eat carbohydrates, I'm not going to produce insulin, which, yeah, like you said, your insulin variability throughout the day will be lower naturally. But there's a lot of other things that can inhibit, or not inhibit, but cause insulin secretion and cause your body to produce insulin, that it almost kind of deflects this whole theory in general. Like, one thing I read about the other day was people that go on keto or they go low carbs before they become fat adapted, throughout the middle of the night, they're going to have sleep trouble because, well, a lot of times they will, because when your liver is depleted of glycogen, you're going to reach a point in your sleep cycle when you're trying to find glycogen. And then that'll cause an increase in cortisol or a spike in, or a stress response to the body. And then a lot of times that'll cause people to wake up, if they're glycogen depleted. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people have trouble sleeping on preps and other things like that. So, there are so many issues that can cause from just saying, okay, I'm just going to eliminate an entire macronutrient from my diet, because they think that that's going to help them reduce the chances of storing body fat. Now, of course, yeah, high insulin levels inhibits lipolysis. We know that, but they've also done tons of studies to show that in control variables where protein's equated, that whether it's fat dominant diets or carbohydrate dominant diets, fat loss is equatable. So that shows that the inhibition of lipolysis through insulin really is insignificant. It seems for a general person. So yeah, it's really interesting that it gains so much traction because it's such a simple thing that it makes sense almost for people who just don't want to look into the facts or what actually makes sense.
Yeah, and I think people
people who demonize insulin don't necessarily know that insulin is good unless you have pre-diabetes or diabetes. Like, you need insulin. And though it's not good to have frequent insulin spikes, so eating all the time, nobody necessarily really is eating all the time. And as long as you have your calories, actually eating calories that you need in order to maintain or lose weight, like, the insulin is not, the variations in your insulin is not going to make a difference. So if you have 6 meals a day versus 3 meals a day, that's going to spike insulin, because every single time you eat the carb or the protein, that's going to spike your insulin. It doesn't mean that you're going to gain more body fat just because insulin is spiked more times.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. There you go with your way of putting this into very simple, easy to understand terms.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Ultimately, it's calories. It's energy balance is where the focus needs to be on. And Gary Taubes, the guy who makes a lot of money on this model, anytime somebody preaches or demonizes a certain thing for monetary gain, has to be taken with extreme caution. So that's what I always tell people.
100%. It bothers me when any professional, any doctor, any RD, anybody says that you have to follow this diet or you have to do this specific thing because it causes this, or anybody that is dogmatic in the way that they speak or think that people should live, that's a problem, and you need to run. Because
well said.
Like Aaron, you have said, every single person is different, and we cannot put people into a box or into a bubble and say everything's going to work for you. Like, yes, there are some diabetics who they have seen, not be diabetic anymore after they go keto. This doesn't mean that every single diabetic needs to go keto. There are multiple ways to lower your insulin levels, lower your hemoglobin A1C levels, to get back to being a healthy person with healthy insulin levels, weight loss itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Good point.
I got a quick side note, just really, really quick, and then we'll start to wrap this up, Lacey. But you had mentioned when we were talking about PCOS, metformin, and we're talking about insulin and the carbohydrate model. So metformin, really, really fascinating, and glucose disposal agents in general. Have you heard this stuff about how metformin has been shown in mice to actually increase telomere length?
Yes. So that's right. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you if you've heard of it and what your thoughts were, because it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, so metformin is being, it's coming out as a drug that can potentially help with longevity. Mm-hmm. So increasing the lifespan per se. So I was super interested to see that. Metformin has not really had any side effects shown. So now some people, correct me if I'm wrong, will have some gastrointestinal problems because it is absorbed in the gut, right? Aside from that, but berbeриne's interesting too. Berbeриne's another natural glucose disposal agent, in line with cinnamon or bitter millet extract or citrus bergamot. All these agents are metabolized in the liver, if I'm not mistaken. I've actually read that berberine, side by side with metformin, is nearly as effective at certain dosages. Have you heard that? Yeah, it's fantastic. And I've actually tried to get my own sister to take it, and she won't take it. Berberine's fantastic. The only problem is that berberine it's less studied. Metformin has been studied extensively.
Sure.
And also, I think the struggle with these agents too is we don't necessarily know how they're going to affect each specific individual. And with berberine, the struggle is people going hypoglycemic.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that was my next question: is if these products and glucose disposal agents, how much merit you place in them for a general health tool for people. But like you said, there's certainly individual variability for somebody who already has low blood sugar, possibly, and then they take that, and it obviously can cause issues. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on general people taking them.
Yeah,
I don't think people should take them unless you have a problem with and you have elevated hemoglobin A1C, pre-diabetes. I don't think you need to take it. Or if you have PCOS that's insulin resistance caused, then you should take it. But for the general person, I like to say stay away from adding any hormone, thyroid, anything that can affect your body that way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we just don't simply don't know the long-term adverse effects, right?
Yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah, just at the risk of adverse side effects when it might not be, something that's going to correct anything because you don't know. It just goes back to finding out what's really, wrong with you and what condition you actually have, and make sure that you're treating that specifically.
No, exactly.
The podcast is called the Flow State of Mind podcast, and Flow State, are you familiar with Flow State?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Oh, nice. We can kind of talk about
that. Flow state is basically like when you're completely immersed in an activity, you're finding your flow. You lose track of time. It's your thing. It's your happy place. It's where you're thriving. So we ask every guest on the podcast, how do you find your flow? When are you in flow? When do you feel best? What's Lacey Dunn's flow state?
Sleeping.
Stop.
That was a terrible answer. But it's the truth. I love sleeping.
They've actually measured this though, objectively in brainwaves, where they've had people play certain games. So say they have a subject who's really passionate about video games. They've actually studied and found a brainwave that indicates quote unquote flow state. Where you're only focused on that exact task at hand, where you're so passionate about what you're looking at in that moment that literally 2 hours pass. And if that's sleeping, then then I can understand that. But
oh, that's so funny. I truly love sleeping, though. I really do.
That's good. It's good for you.
But I love weightlifting. That's training is my me time, and it feels so good to push myself and prove to myself that I can do it, and also being like, hey, I have this amazing body that can do all these things that God gave me, and I'm able to take care of it. So both of those, weight training and sleeping, even though sleeping wins.
No, I really like both of those too.
That's a good combination for gains right there. So
right? A lot of people miss out on that sleep, and I can promise you I have zero problem making it happen.
I need to take a few lessons from your book.
I know. I swear, just have a little cat, have her there.
Don't give her any ideas.
Yeah. We already have 4 dogs running around here. I think we're good.
This is not a good environment for a cat.
No. Cool. Well, I mentioned your Instagram at the beginning. Anywhere else that our guests can find you?
Yeah, of course. And I want to thank you guys so much again for having me on your podcast. It's seriously such an honor. You guys are fantastic people. And Erin, I have been in touch with you forever. I just adore and love you. So thank you for being such an inspiration for ladies and for always promoting health and happiness. So thank you so much for that. So anybody who wants to know more about me or reach out to me, you can go to my my Instagram at Faith and Fit. You can go to my more science-based Instagram at Uplift Fit Nutrition. You can email me at fitandfaith@gmail.com. That's not faithandfit@gmail.com. That's fitandfaith@gmail.com. And you can email me any questions you have. And then I have a website, upliftfit.org, and then a podcast, Uplift Fit Nutrition. If you guys have any questions, if you want any specific topics hit on, just let me know. And thank you guys so much again. It was such an honor.
You are so welcome.
The podcast of Lacey's is highly, highly recommended. I think I've listened to every episode, so make sure you guys do check that out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's certainly a really good podcast. Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, we'll wrap up here today. Thank you again, Lacey.
Thank you.
Thank you.